I was approached to ask if I could do some sharing along the lines of understanding children with special needs, because this is the area I work in. And I've always kind of declined, but through encouragement and prayers, and it's very true what we were taught today, that as an RE teacher, it is about self-sacrifice, and that we should meet our challenges head on. If you don't have a challenge and you don't go through the struggle, you don't know how to draw closer to God. So through this challenge of having to stand up and speak, okay, and the struggle of having to go through the emotions of finding the confidence and to find the words, and yes, I do wave my hands around a lot. To do this, I found that there is great comfort and power and strength from God when you put everything into prayer and entrust everything to God. And this is where we find the strength to be able to stand up and to do what is asked of us. So this originally was given to the Mandarin speakers RE teacher seminar back in the summer. So I kind of like, I don't know how relevant it is in terms of for our needs, but when I think back on it, it is very relevant, for although we may not see sort of like some of the conditions that I work with in school. Sorry, I should explain a little bit more. So I work in special education. The children I work with have varying degrees of disability. So I predominantly work with early years children. So we have them from 2 up to age 8. And I was working kind of like ASC children, so I did a lot with autism and stuff like that. So, but the last 2 years I've changed and I've worked with multiple learning difficulty children. And that has taught me that, our school ethos is that every child matters, and it should be the same within church, that, every child does matter. So and we may not see the disabilities now, but as the doors of grace are open wider and we spread God's word far and wide, we may getting more families that will come to the church to seek God, and they may bring with them children that, we may encounter further along the lines. Whereas, sorry, if I suddenly stop, and it's just because I'm thinking. We'll just move on. So, understanding children with special needs. Like I said earlier, I think in the UK church population, we don't see degrees of severe learning difficulties. It's quite mild, I think. So, what is a special need? So, a special need is just kind of like an individual requiring additional or special support in the development. So it could be physical, could be a learning disability, could be an impairment of behaviour or an emotional. Okay, feel free to, if you want to ask questions, just to stick your hand up. Okay, so what might this look like? These aren't children off from school, they're just off the internet, okay? But it kind of like gives you an idea, if we're looking at sort of like society out there, what kind of children, or what we're looking at as someone with special needs. Okay, so it could be someone in a wheelchair. We see this often on TV, the Paralympics and things like that, and it's to do with their mobility and their body. They're not able to have sort of like moving arms and legs or whatever, so that's why they're in the chair. But it could be that they have some kind of birth defect or an injury, and that's why they're in a chair. Okay, someone who looks physically different. I think we all think of straight away people who are like facially different, who may have a growth or Down syndrome, or facially they look different physically. Or someone who's wearing a hearing aid, or might have calipers on their legs, or might have a brace. Okay, or someone we might encounter who may be talking with their hands, waving their hands a lot, or at the moment, there's a big thing to push British Sign Language, and that it's going to be taught in schools somewhere along the line, because they see the need for this form of communication. Okay, so, and then there are those that may behave differently, and you might see them as having strange or weird behaviour. So you might see those who are constantly flapping or have sudden outbursts, and, you know, the way they portray themselves or is not necessarily how we would consider that this is normal behaviour, okay? So all those types of things or traits or whatever we want to call them, it could be in a person because of various different reasons. So it could be a birth defect or an injury or something along them lines, inherited condition. Okay, so I think the idea is that when we encounter people like that, I think it's human nature to stand and to stare. Okay, but I think what we're talking about today is that, you know, this is the house of God, and that everyone is welcome. So, you know, if we have parents that bring their children along that like this, I think it's the fact that they've come to church has been a massive step. So it doesn't help that people are not going to engage with them and kind of like stare at them, or, you know, just drifting to one side and sort of like talking and pointing and things like that. So these things aren't helpful things, and that we have to realise that, you know, in this environment we should be more welcoming and to engage with all children and all adults that come through the door, regardless of sort of like race or ability or language. Okay, so when we were doing this in Leicester, I was kind of like saying to them that, you know, as an RE teacher, we need to get to know the parents first. Okay, so make a point of speaking to your parents, and I think regardless of whether the child has a disability or not, one of the things we do as an RE teacher is that we should be connecting with our parents, because I think, as Preacher was saying, that, you know, RE is supposed to be continued in the home as well. So, you know, get to know your parents, ask them what goes on and type of things, and then build that relationship, so that if you know that that child has a special requirement, maybe they, you know, they have difficulty processing information, so that when you're speaking to them, they're not looking at you, or they don't seem to understand you, they seem to be doing their own thing. Okay, so you can ask the parents, you know, what happens in the house and what can I do, and incorporate these things within in church as well. Okay, then get to know your child, and to invite that child into your RE class if you've got that, if you're going to have a child that has a special need in your class. Okay, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because if you don't ask the question, then you'll never find the answer, and you will make up in your own mind what is wrong, and that's not always a good thing. So, for example, when we take a new child into school, we often speak to the parents first, and often they will give you a portrait of the child's behaviour or his condition, but when that child actually comes into school, they present slightly differently. So what I'm saying is that the behaviour they might have at home may not necessarily be the same behaviour that they will have in church. Are we all following what I'm saying? Okay. And then the other thing is to support one another, because in an RE situation, there should not be only one teacher, there should be at least 3 of you, or if not more. So therefore, you know, like I said earlier, if you're struggling, don't be afraid to ask for help, okay? And I think the main thing to remember is that we should support one another and not leave it to just that person to deal with something that's going on. in the classroom that, they're trying to manage everything on their own. We should be spreading this out to give everybody sort of like, give everybody a breather or a support, or, and I think something that we have in church that I see that our parents in school don't have is that I think within our church network, I think we're very supportive of one another. We would support the families in church much more so than I think the families that I work with at school. They don't have sort of like extended support, and they often have to rely on sort of like other professional people to give them the support, whereas I think in a church network we're very good at helping one another and supporting one another, and then to pray for that child, for all that a child with special needs, they may or may not know, because I think the concept of God is quite difficult for them to process, but we don't know what God has planned for them. So I think the very least you can do is to pray for that child and to pray for that family. Okay. We missed the one. Oh, wrong direction. Okay, so I was asked to talk about the autistic spectrum disorder when I was in Leicester, because a lot of the families were kind of experiencing difficulty, challenging behaviour with their children. And I think in terms of what I saw and what Sister Sophia saw, the children's behaviour was actually quite normal in sense, and that it's about developing a routine, a way to kind of like teach them. Okay, but so because I think autism is one of those big things that's happening right now, and that everybody kind of like very quick to diagnose this, and they say, oh well, this behaviour is this happening because that child is autistic. And I think actually it's not as simple as that, and you can read for yourself. Okay, I'm not going to read it out for you. That this is what somebody with autism thinks, and that when we look at the traits, you might think, oh well, so and so does this or so and so does that, and yet therefore that person is autistic. But actually that's not the case, and they have to kind of like have difficulties in all areas in order to get that diagnosis. Okay, so I'm not a practitioner, I can't diagnose or anything like that. All I can give you is that my experience of what it's like working with children with autism. So this is why it's called a spectrum, and it's not like one thing or another thing. It's actually a spectrum because someone with autism, there is varying degrees of it. So you can have a child that will be very, very would only have very mild autism. So there may be only certain things that will gives a trigger and things like that. But then we have those who are on the other extreme. So a lot of those children that I work with are on that far extreme. They're quite severe because they have additional sensory needs. So it could be that not only do they have Down syndrome, but they're also on the spectrum, or they might have cerebral palsy, but they also have autism. So it's like multiple and complex. But I think sort of like in terms of what we see in church and things like that, some of the behaviours, it's quite mild. So these are just sort of like just slides. I don't want to be reading them out, but I will give you time to read it. Just give us a nod if you've read it. So when it comes to things, so with the social communication thing, so like sometimes when you say something to somebody, like watch yourself, that's a very good one. It's like they literally take that as, so because they can't process that information. So if you said to them, "Oh, you're cool as a cucumber," and thing, and they might be thinking, "Well, I look nothing like a cucumber." But it's like, so you have to be wary of what you say in terms of how you communicate if we have children like that. Okay. So likewise with social interaction. So they don't get normal social cues that, if I'm sick of a person standing there talking to me, I would just kind of like walk away or whatever. But they don't get that. They would just keep following you and keep talking and talking and talking and talking, whatever. Okay, so am I going too fast for people? Okay. Thank you, Joe, for acknowledging me. So this is another aspect of it. So they don't kind of like perceive danger or, situations and things like that. Are we done? Okay. So these are the traits. So, like I was saying earlier, they have obsessions, they experience anxiety, lack awareness of danger, so all those traits, but it's not a case of, they have inappropriate eye contact. Just because I'm not looking at you all the time doesn't mean I'm autistic, okay? So it's like, you can't just look at one thing and go, yeah, that's that. And, I talk a lot with twiddling objects, but, I'm obviously not autistic, okay? So these are the traits, and I have to say that when I've worked with the very young children like this, you do get a lot of injuries as an adult, and people always say to me, "Oh, do you not ever get really tired or stressed out or stuff because you've been working in that environment for nearly 20 years?" And I just think, well, no, because I see it as a challenge. Yes, it's a challenge, but actually the rewards that when you see a difference, the rewards outweigh the bad stuff that happens to you all the time. So I'm saying that is because actually having autism isn't a bad thing, because you can teach a child. You can still teach a child. You can teach any child, whatever their disability. Okay, so just as a little bit of a testimony, my older sister, Deaconess Deborah, her daughter Marjorie, she's now 30-something. Can't actually remember how old, but she's autistic. Okay, and we've always known from very young that there was something different, but 30 years ago they didn't have that diagnosis. I think it's only kind of in the last 10, 15 years that this diagnosis has been sort of proven earlier. So we've always known that there was something wrong with Marjorie, but people, sometimes at work, people always say, but if you have a faith and you believe in God, why do you think God does this? Why does he make the children like this? And I don't have an answer for that, because I always say that, these children were put here to teach us how to maybe behave better, or, gives us the chance to see the value in these kids. And I think my sister was very much like this, because when Marjorie was very young, she was quite a handful, and but she still carried on her church work, and she still taught Marjorie to do everything that is expected of her. So when it came to praying, we would still all pray together. So she kind of gradually learned that this is the routine, this is what we have to do. And for all that, we don't know what she's doing when she's kneeling down with her hands clasped and her eyes closed, and she's saying something, but we don't know if she's actually, what she's saying is words, praying words, okay? But we know that she follows the mode, and for all that she's not able to be left in the house on her own, she has learned to look after herself, so she can make you a cup of tea. She has quite good understanding, but you wouldn't be able to hold a conversation with her. And I think sort of like what my sister says is that, you know, she truly thanked God that even though Marjorie is the way she is, she still was able to continue to do her work, and it kind of like taught her the patience and to show her that, you know, it isn't all about work, and that it is about your life, your family balance. And because of that, I think her kind of like, her faith is quite, has a quite good foundation. And, you know, in church, Marjorie, she isn't involved in all stuff, but she at least knows that when we come to church, this is the behaviour I have, this is the expected behaviour. And so I think in terms of children can all be taught how to behave in a manner that is correct, if you like. So, yeah. So, when we were talking about children with special needs, okay, it's about their sensory processing, if you like. So we all have a brain, but for some of these children, the brain may be damaged, or there may be some kind of injury prior to birth or before birth. So they could be born with that kind of like injury. So because if your brain's not working properly, then it affects all your other senses, okay? So I noticed earlier that somebody said, oh, the fan, the sound of the extractor or air conditioning was really, really loud to the point where they couldn't hear the speaker. I don't know how many people experience that. Raise your hands. Did anybody notice that the extractor fan was really, really loud? Yeah, so for some of you, your hearing is very perceptive, okay? And someone's just clicked something there. So I think when we draw our attention to our hearing, okay, we become more kind of like in tune to that sound. So if we were to all just be very quiet and see what sounds we can hear. Anybody want to say anything? Okay, so yeah, so in terms of when we perceive sound, okay, when we're all quiet, we can actually kind of like hear the thing. So I can hear I don't know if you can hear the whirling of that. Okay, some might hear that the clock is ticking. Okay, so someone in terms of having, say, autism, okay, that perceived hearing could be multiplied 1,000 times, so that the hearing, you know, something that we can distinguish as being that kind of like sound to there, above my head, okay, to a child with ASD, that sound could be. So you would probably see them do this a lot, okay, and probably try and stop it, but they would probably do it all the more. So I think if we move to our eyes, okay, our eyes are very, very important. I think we take in a lot of information with our eyes, and that we can see multiple things happening all at once with our eyes. So I'm looking at all of you, and I can see that some of you, your body language, you've got arms crossed or legs crossed, and some are like sitting up listening, and you know, I can see what's happening in the back, and I can process all this information all at one time stood here. But in terms of someone that has like a sensory processing difficulty, or like I say, an ASD child, they won't be able to process all that information at the same time. So they may only see a certain bit of it. And because all of this information is bombarding their minds all at the same time, they can't deal with it. So you might see some odd behaviours, okay? So a lot of the children at work, they kind of like, if the light's too bright, and they're kind of very sensitive to this, so you see them doing this a lot, and they don't look, and they flick, because it's actually easier to focus on something when there's a flickering. So you see these kind of behaviours all the time, and you might think, oh well, that's super strange, or that's really weird, so let's not go near them and things like that. But it's like how each person sees things differently. And then you also have those that are maybe visually impaired. Okay, so we're not talking about ASD, just ASD children. So someone with a visual impairment, it's always best not to just creep up behind them and just touch them without making any sound, because they don't know, they can't see or perceive you coming close to you, okay? So those who were sat with me this morning will realise that we were just having a conversation, and the next thing I knew, George just went, whoa, and I just kind of like went, so it's about that kind of thing as well. So not that I have a visual impairment, yes I do wear glasses. But it's that kind of thing, it's kind of being aware all round of sort of like how you communicate or how you approach a person that might have a need. Okay, so if you're thinking in terms of someone that has a visual impairment and they can't see you and they can't see you approach you, so if you're just going to go like that, it's going to be a, you know, so because the hearing's pretty all right, you know, maybe you should make some sounds to let them know that you're approaching them before you actually touch them and say anything to them. Okay, likewise, if a person is hard of hearing, okay, you can't be screaming at them because they're not going to turn around. You need to kind of like look at them face on so that they can see you coming and to converse with them. So it's not a case of, it's a really bad thing that when you know that someone's got a hearing impairment, you automatically do this, I'm talking to you, can you hear me? And it's that very exaggerated big mouth thing, and it's like, it doesn't actually help anybody. And it's better that you speak in a normal tone and normal expression. And if the child is a lot older and they've had sort of like been taught how to read lips and things like that, it's a lot easier for them to understand you when you speak in a normal tone instead of this exaggerated, slow motion, loud thing, okay? So, and then there are those that their noses don't quite work properly, or they could be hypersensitive. So if we all take a deep breath in. Is there any smells around you that you might find very, very unpleasant? I'm very hot and sweaty. Okay, so I think in terms of sort of like, because we're all reasonable adults, okay, we're not going to go, yes, very sweaty VO person there. But some people might find that this sense of smell is really, really overpowering, and they don't want to sit next to you because the smell you're projecting is actually quite disgusting. And for someone with a special need, they might actually come out and say that because they don't know how to process that social behaviour, whereas sort of like in terms of us, we can just go, yeah, you know, a little bit, or say, oh, you know, did you know Lynx has got this new product out, and be helpful that way? But somebody with, especially a child, you know, they don't know how to perceive these sort of like social normities type of thing, that they would just go, can chow me, or whatever, okay? Or likewise, they might find a certain smell really, really disgusting. So I think the sisters that are among us who have been pregnant, you might, when during your pregnancy, your sense of smell might have been heightened, and there might have been certain smells that you couldn't bear. Because I know there's some people that can't bear the smell of coffee. So it would actually induce vomiting in them when you're pregnant. So for some children with sort of like a special sensory processing difficulty, some smells may induce them to be like that, to be violently sick, or, and sometimes it might not be an obvious smell. It could be a very subtle smell to us, but to them, it's like 10 times overpowering. But then there are also those that cannot perceive a smell. So we can smell gas and know that is dangerous, but to someone who doesn't have that sensory perception, they not know that that is a bad thing. So in all our senses it works. There's always a heightened version and a hypo and a hypertensive. So it's like one's really, really strong, unbearable, and the other one is kind of like, not really there, and you've got to kind of like really need it to be 100 times stronger before you can smell it and deal with it. So likewise with our hands as well. Okay, so those with a disability that don't have moving arms and moving limbs, then yeah, they will need assisted help. But for me, I found that, so currently I'm working with children that have profound and multiple difficulties. So a lot of their limbs are kind of like quite tight. But we have since found that through exercise and therapy, if you encourage them to move their limbs to, say, touch a chime that makes a sound, so they're realizing that they're doing it, they will do it more, but they had to be taught that process of this movement can make that sound, and it's actually my hand that's doing it. So for some children, you need to really kind of like teach that. But in terms of, say, an ASD child, touch can be a hypersensitive thing or a hyposensitive thing. So something that to us, we know not to touch things like a radiator or a cooker top, because that's dangerous and it's hot and it'll burn and it'd be very, very painful. But for some children, they have no sense of that. So to them, touching a top of the cooker might think, oh, they've burnt the hand, but they don't have that sensation. So that's potentially quite dangerous. So you have to kind of like be aware of their surroundings and their environments. Okay, and then there's those that are the opposite, that just a small caress on the hand to them could cause immense pain. Okay, so again, these are sort of like extremes that we don't see so much in our church environment, but more so in my work environment. Okay, so we talk about our mouth next. Okay, so we use our mouths for communication. So a lot of children may not be able to verbally communicate, okay, or to use their voices. But likewise, to some children as well, again, a taste can be overpowering or the opposite. So we might eat a chili and think, oh, that's really, really hot. But for a child that is ASD and stuff and has pica, who they will constantly put things in their mouths and eat anything, that is kind of like quite bad. So you need to watch their environment. So make sure that things that aren't edible don't be put in their way, type of thing. Okay, so, and we've done all of it. Okay, I think we've done all of it. Yay, 10 minutes break. So, I'm kind of like rambling a bit because I'm trying to process what's in my head to be able to deliver it in a way that I think will make sense. So I realised that I might have drifted off in various bits. So if you have a question, I'm quite happy to answer a question. And like I say, I'm not here to diagnose anyone. I can't diagnose anything. But what I do have is I can give you examples or experiences that I have had working with children with special needs. So I know I'm 5 minutes early, so we're just going to have a break. So we'll have a silent prayer. Amen. Okay, I'm not going to ramble so much. Second.